schedule was announced today, so we put it out there. We have 15 speakers coming from all over the world, as far away as Croatia, and as close as Richmond, Virginia. So it's going to be great. Tickets are going to go on sale this Thursday. You can get them. You can get them on the RVA Javascript.com website, and I think you have to go through. There's probably a link there to go through Eventbrite. We have 325 tickets. It has sold out the last 2 years, either between 2 to 3 weeks in advance. So if you want to go, we also have, when they come out this time, we'll have an early bird pricing between probably now and maybe October, or maybe the first week in October. I'm not sure, but I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room that have gone before. You really can't get a better deal having a one-day conference for as cheap as we do it. It's a great opportunity to learn a lot more, and we video everything. Hayden has videoed all the talks last year with a couple of his friends, and I think we're going to do that again this year. And so it's an opportunity. You can go on afterwards and get the videos off YouTube to make sure you know what's out there and continue to learn. So also wanted to make a quick announcement. I know we have every month we have new people that come, or every couple of months. I wasn't here last month, but we've got our RVA Dev Slack group. So if you want to get in the community, if you want to be, it's great to be here. We're here one night a month. But if you want to get engaged in our Slack community, it's all developers. That's all it is. And great way to continue to further your knowledge, ask other people questions. You can send direct messages to anybody you want through Slack. It's just a community group. And if there's a lot of people in here, if you know someone who is already in it, you can go to them and ask them to add you. There's now a little invite people or an invite person link at the end. And if you don't know anybody, just come to me. If you give me your personal email address, I can just stick it into the app, and we can get you an invite sent out. So it's pretty easy to do that. Now, without further ado, because you're probably tired of hearing me talk, I want to introduce Jay Hogan. Jay just gave me his bio like 5 minutes ago, so I'm going to try to memorize as best as I can.
I like cats.
Jay is from Roanoke, Virginia, Southwest Virginia.
Yep.
He went to UVA. He was also in the ROTC in the Marine Corps while he was there.
Close.
Graduated from UVA. He has been in the
in the business
in the IT business for the last 20 plus years. His last 8 years have been at Single Stone Consulting, which is a great organization. He is currently their technical director. He used to manage their app development side, and then he's kind of moved away from that side of things and moved back into or got into the business side, and then now moved back into a technical role. He is local here in Richmond, married, 2 kids, 2 boys, one age 6, one age 10, and one of his sons is autistic. And did you tell me anything else?
I don't think so.
Married, I believe.
That's what I say. You can ask.
All right, please welcome Jay Hogan.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to try and keep this to the 45-minute to an hour range. Galen gave me a little bit of a guideline there. I get really excited about stuff, so I'll try and keep it into that. So, all right, so if you guys were following along, you maybe thought you were going to come to a TensorFlow JS talk. I chickened out, so here's Dialogflow instead. Hopefully that TensorFlow talk will come soon, but for now we're going to learn a little bit about conversational interfaces and a technology called Dialogflow, and just a teensy little bit of JavaScript. So I swear I'm going to get some in there, so be patient with me. So again, as Galen said, I'm Jay Hogan, technical director, Single Stone Consulting. Been doing this for 20 years. I really love JavaScript, which is kind of rare for an old guy like me, but I'm pretty into it. So let's see what we can do. So today we're going to talk about Dialogflow. For the first half or so, it's going to be overview and concepts. So get you familiar with the service, familiar with the idea behind conversational interfaces, and then we're going to do a demo. And the demo will be really quick. I'll demo it on my phone. Unfortunately, I can't get it to show up on the screen, but it's a voice interface, so you'll be able to hear it. And then I'll walk through the code behind the demo, so you guys can see how not really hard it is to create a conversational interface that understands English, not like archaic commands or slash commands. If you're familiar with Slack and their chatbots, this is a real chatbot that understands English and uses machine learning and AI and natural language processing, and even a dumb guy like me can do it. So let's get started. So what is Dialogflow? So this is the marketing spiel on their webpage. It says, Dialogflow is a service that gives users new ways to interact with your product by building engaging voice and text-based conversational interfaces such as voice apps and chatbots, and it's also powered by AI and all that stuff, right? So let me break this down into the key things that I think you should pay attention to. One is your product, right? Dialogflow is not a product. It's not a platform. It's a service. It's designed to make your product better by enabling conversational interfaces. And again, voice and text-based conversational interfaces. So as I mentioned, it's a service for your product to build text-based conversational interfaces. And the next thing, if I can hit the key, is it's powered by AI. So as you'll see when I walk through the setup of it, you'll see that it doesn't look like it's powered by AI. It looks like it's just you just go in and enter some stuff and poof, all it goes. But behind the scenes, it's got a lot of powerful natural language processing and machine learning algorithms that are working for you. So let's get into some concepts. So the first concept that's important is this concept of an agent. So the agent is your virtual agent that you're building, right? So you think of it like similar to a human call center agent, but instead it's a machine, right? And so Dialogflow has this concept of an agent, which is really just kind of this big container, this big bag where you add all your intents and all the other things that are important to make your agent work. But it's a kind of an important concept. So we'll start there at agent, and then we'll flow into this concept of intents. So an intent is not new to Dialogflow. Who here has built an Alexa skill? Anybody built an Alexa skill? Okay. Well, sorry about that, but Alexa skills also use this concept of an intent. And intent is it's common in the chatbot industry. It's really describing the user's intention. So you are trying to build this intent, and you're trying to capture the thing that the user is trying to communicate to you. That's the intent. And so think about here in this example, you've got an agent, and the users are asking questions like, what's the forecast? What's the weather? What's the temperature? Those are all sort of mapped to this concept of a forecast intent. We're capturing the intention of the user, and then we're going to go do stuff with it and give them results, right? So an intent is a very important concept, so we'll work off of that. So when you have intents, you have this concept of training phrases. So the training phrases, sometimes called utterances in other chatbot languages or chatbot frameworks, is really the things that you want your intent to react to, right? And so you can give it, so for example, if you were doing a pizza ordering system, it would respond to order a pizza, send me a pan pizza, send me a pie, I don't know, give me a pizza with sausage and cheese. These are all pizza ordering intents, right? All of these utterances map to this concept of placing an order. So when you're going in and you're setting up your intents, as you'll see in the example, you're going to try and think of all the different ways, not all the different ways, all the major ways you think the user will sort of ask for or express this intent. And those are training phrases. You don't need to provide them all. Dialogflow recommends 10 as sort of a rough best practice. I've seen it work with like 4. So Dialogflow also has these concept of default intents, and so when you create your agent for the first time, you'll always have 2 intents. One is called the welcome intent, which is the thing that sort of happens whenever you first start interacting with your agent in whatever platform you're using. So, or it could be just something that responds to like, hi, hey, howdy, hey there, what's up? That's a welcome intent. Dialogflow will give you one of those for free, but you can also go in and change it and create, make changes to it as you need. There's also this concept of a fallback intent. So this is like the sort of if then else. It's the last else, right? If none of the other intents match, then it'll match this fallback intent, and it's basically like, sorry, I don't know, right? And so it gives you one by default that has like 10 or 15 different responses that it can give, but you can go in and tweak it and do make it say whatever you want. Okay, so now this concept of parameters. So I like to think of the parameters as the part of the phrase or utterance that represents the data that you're trying to get out of the utterance, right? So if someone says, can I get a small pizza? Small is a data element, right? It's a parameter that maps to the size of the pizza that they're looking for, right? And the next example is, I'd like a cheese pizza. Well, that's representing a topping, right? And then deliver me a medium thin crust pizza. Well, they've now specified two different parameters in the utterance that are important to you as you're starting to build out your chatbot. And so I think of parameters. I think of parameters as sort of if the intent is a method on your agent, right? So if you're building out, like the agent was just code, the intent would be the method, and the parameters would be the parameters of the method, right? Creating parameters leveraging parameters is sort of a two-step process called define and annotate. So the first step is you want to define your parameters. So is that readable? Okay, good. So when you're sitting down, say for example the ordering pizza intent, we want to define. So what are the parameters that we're looking for in that utterance? And we're expecting potentially that they'll tell us the size, the crust, and maybe the toppings, right? So you'll go in and you'll define those. Each parameter has a name, so size, an entity, which we'll get to later. Think of it as the type, right? And this one uses a custom entity, which we'll talk about, called the size entity. A value, which is just sort of a default value, which usually represents the value that they provided. And then it can also have other metadata like, is it a required parameter? Is it a list? So toppings, for example, is a list, meaning that they could specify 0 to 10 toppings if they wanted to, and it would map that to a list internally. You could also specify prompts. So if there's a required parameter and they didn't provide it, you could say, how do you want to prompt them for that information? It's like, what size? And then finally, a default value. So if it's not required, but they don't specify it, what's the default? And then in the annotation stage, when you're sort of keying in your utterances, or you're giving the training phrases to the intent for that agent, you need to, for those training phrases, sort of mark out or annotate what are the parameters, right? And in many cases, the reason why you do define and then annotate is because Dialogflow is already pretty smart, right? It knows based on the types or the entities of the parameters, and it's already starting to use that machine learning to its advantage, right? By saying, oh, small, well, that's a size. I know that because the size entity, which we'll get to, actually has a small value, right? And so it will predefine, in many cases, and get it right the first time. If it doesn't, you can redefine it. But essentially, here in this stage, you're giving it the training phrase, you're telling it what parameters to look for, and then in the training phrase, you're saying these are the actual parameters that map to those, or the actual values in the training phrase that map to the parameters. So, okay. Here's an example of list parameters. So I'd like a cheese pizza, I'd like a sausage and cheese pizza, I want a sausage, pepperoni, and cheese pizza. The nice thing about parameters, or list parameters, are that Dialogflow is really smart about it. It gets rid of commas, spaces, connectors, ands, prepositions. Basically, it just knows that what the values are, and it plucks them out, and it drops them into an array. So when you're actually processing this on the back end, you just get toppings, and it's going to tell you the exact toppings that it mapped to. So if you tried to do this in Slack, good luck with the regex, okay?
What if the parameter has like one topping has 2 words in it, and then you have to kind of train it for that? Like,
You give it, so it's an example. When you see I have a topping called green peppers, it just recognizes it. Because when you specify it, you specify the entity. We'll get to entities in a second. The aliases or the values for it. One of them is green peppers, and so it can see it. It's actually pretty smart too. I haven't tested this, but supposedly you can leave the alias, the values open-ended. And so it will determine that, hey, these look like foods or vegetables, and it will auto-detect. I haven't tried that. It seems magic to me, but maybe it works. Okay, now that you have parameters, you can then leverage that name that you gave as parameter references. And those parameter references can be used in things like responses. So later on, we'll show you how to define a set of static responses. And so you can use those parameter values or these parameter references in those responses. You can also use them in prompts and as the value of other parameters as well. So here's the example. So if you ordered a dollar size, dollar crust pizza with dollar toppings, assuming that size is small, crust is thin, and toppings are sausage and cheese, then the response will be rendered that way. So think of it like a templating language, right? Pretty basic stuff. So prompts. So again, you saw the setup for the parameters, right? Size, crust, toppings. If you make all three of those parameters required, then here's this sequence will work out like this. You'd say, I'd like a pan pizza, right? Dialogflow would say, well, you didn't give me the size, so I'm going to prompt the user for the size. Well, what size pizza would you like? Well, I want a small, right? You just say small, or you can even say, I'd like a small, right? You don't have to just say small. It'll figure it out. And then it says, well, you didn't tell me what toppings. So what toppings do you want? So just cheese, please, right? And it'll see cheese, and it'll just pull out cheese, and it'll respond with something like that. So I didn't have to code that. It just knows that it's prompting for toppings. It sees a topping in the answer, and it just pulls it out, plucks it out.
But is it smart enough to catch things like
Yes.
a no cheese?
Oh, no cheese?
Yeah.
Probably not, unless you coded it, yeah. So reverse toppings, yeah, we'd have to code that. Yeah. It could be a topping called no cheese, and then it'll say, okay, gotcha, you don't want cheese.
Quick question. So I think I missed it. So do you have to tell it what toppings to expect?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we'll get to that. It was kind of hard to chicken or the egg with parameters and entities, but we're going to get to entities right now, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Entities, cool. All right. So entities are types for your parameters, right? So there's a handful of system entities. When I say a handful, like 50, okay? But you can also create your own entities, which is what I was demoing there. And developer entities are powerful, right? It's kind of the superpower of Dialogflow is you tell it what to expect, it sees it, it detects it, it pulls it out. It's kind of magic. So here's some system entities, right? So there's dates and times in different formats. There's numbers, number, cardinal, ordinal, integer, sequence, flight numbers, if you're building something with airplanes. Mounts with units, area, currency, length, speed, volume, blah, blah, blah. Unit names, area, length, speed, geography, location. That's a good one, right? Detect addresses, that's kind of hard. Who's written that before? Not fun. Contacts, so people names, email, phone numbers, and then just various other stuff, colors, languages, URLs. It finds all kinds of things, yes?
So for a lot of these system entities, there's sort of standard lists of the constants that are associated with them, like there's a standard list of airports.
Mm.
Do these system entities have all of those defined?
They are defined as system inherent, sort of black box.
So it knows RIC.
It knows, I haven't tried airports, but I would imagine that that's a huge value prop, and so they probably keep them up to date. And so it knows all RIC is the Richmond International Airport. Like countries, it knows all the country codes. Zip codes and things like that are based on formats, I imagine. It probably doesn't know all the different postal codes over the entire world, but when it gets into like units, so like feet and square miles and all that, it can figure all that out. Okay, so developer entities. Let's go into this a little bit. So you use developer entities to create entities to supplement the system entities, right? And they're based on the domain of your chatbot or your system that you're building. So pizza, toppings, crust, and size. So entities have three sort of properties. They have a type name, so that would be like topping. They have entries, so there'd be an entry would be something like, I don't know, like let's say green peppers, right? And then each entry can have multiple aliases, so things that also stand for the thing. So peppers, misspelled green peppers. Like you can get really creative with the things that will also map to green peppers or the things that will also map to onions. And the cool thing is you don't have to do plurals, I don't believe. In my testing, it just pluralizes everything correctly. And so it will know anchovy and anchovies. I don't know how, but it does. So it looks something like this. So if you have crust is the type name, the entries would be thin, regular, thick, and gluten-free. And then the aliases, say for regular, would be default, normal, and reg. And that should basically you need to give it enough information to recognize the possible values for your entity, right? So it only really works for enumerated entities, right? Things that have a finite set of values, or at least finite enough that you can model them. If you can't do that, you can, or if it's so large that maintaining that list is painful, you can use the API. So if you can pump things out of your system and pump thousands and thousands and thousands of entities in, and when it trains the model, it'll just bake all that into the training. Okay, context. So context is important not just for Dialogflow, but basically for any conversation you've ever had, right? So because people don't want to repeat themselves, right? And people don't repeat themselves, right? Here's an example. So if you try and have this conversation with Alexa. Last time I tried it, it didn't work, right? So, what's the weather like in Richmond, right? And so the agent says, okay, well, Richmond is a location, but you didn't tell me a time, or a date. I'm just going to assume today. So right now in Richmond, it's 78 degrees under partly cloudy skies, which is probably not correct. So then the user says, okay, well, is it going to rain tomorrow? What did I not say? I did not say in Richmond, right? So, but with context, I know you're probably talking about Richmond because you just said Richmond, right? And Alexa, it's like, what are you talking about? It doesn't always keep that context, right? But with Dialogflow, you can code your chatbot to understand context, pronouns, this, that thing I just mentioned, right? And then again, the last sort of way to talk about this would be to say, hey, what will it be hot, right? So now you didn't give it a location, you didn't give it a day, but you know that last time you were talking about tomorrow, and you were talking about Richmond. So I'm going to tell you about tomorrow in Richmond. Does that make sense? Like the best way you can make your conversational interface seem more realistic is to make it somewhat behave like you would have a conversation with your friend next to you, right? And context is a way to do that. How it works? Okay, so how it works is something like this. So let's say you want to place an order, right? So you place an order, and it immediately says, okay, well, I'm placing an order, so I'm going to call the order intent, and the order intent is going to set like an order context. So that order context is now active, right? And so then it responds, say, well, what can I get for you? And the user says, well, what toppings do you have, right? Well, the topping list intent doesn't care about order, right? But that's fine. It doesn't need that order context. It can just go out, hit the topping list API, get the list of toppings, and respond with, hey, yeah, we have cheese and all this stuff. And they say, cool, all right, well, give me a large pizza with cheese, right? So now that order context was still active, right? So it knew to add that pizza to the order that's active, right? And then maybe it sets a pizza context so that you could then say, well, I changed my mind. Can you take away the cheese? I don't want cheese. No cheese. And potentially, because that pizza context was still active, it knew that you were talking about that pizza that you just added, right? So that's how it works. It's a concept of input context and output context. So intents can be set up to say, I only work if there is an order context active. If you say add a pizza, this is, well, that didn't make any sense. You didn't start an order, right? So it wouldn't even map that to an intent. We also have lifespans, right? So that order context is able to stay active even though it matched an intent that was outside of the order, right? When it was asking about the toppings. It says, okay, well, we can define the context to live through 3, 4, 5 different spans of the conversation and only sort of fall out like after a certain period of time. So contexts are very powerful. It's also kind of hard to understand. So I'll stop talking and show you later. Okay, fulfillment. We're getting a talking thing, I said. We're getting close to it here. Fulfillment is the code that executes in response to an intent to perform custom logic in response. So essentially, the fulfillment is the custom logic that you want your chatbot to do. All the things I've talked about so far is set up through the Dialogflow console or through the Dialogflow API, and you're just playing with Dialogflow. The fulfillment is when you actually want to integrate it in with your product, right? So you define this fulfillment, and then it responds in, the fulfillment logic is called as a webhook in response to an intent that's triggered. You can then react to that intent, get all of its data, all the parameter values, and do things with it. So here's an example of how it works, right? So a user uses their phone or their microphone or whatever to interact with an integration. Let's say it's Slack. They're using the Slack integration. And the Slack integration will send that on to Dialogflow. Dialogflow will match that utterance, that, hey, I want to place an order, to an intent. And then the intent will say, okay, you say you want to place an order. I'm going to call your fulfillment logic, right? And then your fulfillment logic can do whatever it wants. It can actually start an order in your API, in your ordering system. It can create a context and return the context. So essentially, at that point, you are interacting with the life cycle of Dialogflow. And you're plugging in right after the intent matching has occurred, after it's pulled out all the data and sent it onto your service so you can process it. Does that make sense? I'm losing you guys? You guys want me to stop talking? Because I want to stop talking. Yes? Okay, good. All right. Building fulfillment. So there's a couple ways you can do it. You can use this nasty inline editor that they have that's built into the Dialogflow console. Basically, it allows you to have a single index.js file and a packaged JSON file, and basically all 5,000 lines of JavaScript live there. As you can see, I'm not a fan of it, but it's great for prototyping. It also has other disadvantages. It only works in Node 8, so no async await. Who here has written anything that doesn't use async await period? Put your hand down. And also, the deployment can be slow, as you'll see. Well, actually, I don't think we're going to do deployment. So it could take several minutes to deploy the function in Firebase. That's right. It uses Firebase behind the scenes. So if you don't like Firebase, then avoid inline editor. So you can also use define a custom webhook. So now you can host your fulfillment logic pretty much wherever you want, right? The downside to it is it has to be a public URL. Cannot be behind a VPN. Has to be publicly addressable. So you can secure it with basic authentication, which nobody uses, or you can use sort of custom API keys in the headers. This is where Dialogflow starts to fall down a little bit in comparison to, say, Amazon Lex or Microsoft Lewis, which are competitors. Google, who's the owner of Dialogflow, they don't really do a good job of catering to enterprises. So if any of you guys work for enterprises, like Capital One or anything, this would be pretty problematic. They also provide a Node.js fulfillment library, which is basically some abstractions on top of the API responses that you would get from the detect intent API. So, but it does help. It's helpful. It makes it a little bit easier to work with the fulfillment. And the fulfillment that I'm going to demo leverages this fulfillment library. Okay. Responses. So the last thing that happens once you've done your fulfillment logic is the agent or the intent responds, constructs a response. That response could be built into the console, right? It's called a static response. Could be a dynamic response that's returned from your fulfillment logic. And it could also be platform specific. So you could have the Slack platform respond one way and the Google Assistant platform, or have a response for the Google Assistant platform and a different one for Slack and a different one for, your text, your SMS-based messaging. And then you can also define what's called rich or graphical stuff. So certain platforms support, rich UIs. Slack has one where you can have buttons and images and stuff. Google Assistant has one as well. So Dialogflow has some basic stuff you can use there. You can also build custom. So I'll show you as part of the demo. Actually, send some Slack-specific custom payloads, and it'll actually render it. So here's some example rich responses. So this is called a suggestion. So you could respond to a prompt, for example, with what size pizza, and then give them all the options. And if it's in Slack, they can just click the button. They don't have to type it. Images, cards. So cards are sort of a title, a subtitle, an image, and some buttons. So if that response makes sense. And then here's an example of a custom payload. So this is you can't really do this with the basic set of rich UI elements provided by Dialogflow, but you can construct this with JSON and send it through the payload, and it'll get rendered. So some of the basic integrations: Google Assistant, Slack, Facebook Messenger, Twitter, Skype, Twilio, Hangouts, all kinds of other things. Not WhatsApp, which is strange, but these are what you call standard or one-click integrations, meaning you don't have to write any code. You just go in and say, I want this integration, I want this integration, I want this integration. You go in and do a little configuration, put some API keys in, and poof, it just works. You can also build your own, which basically replaces the fulfillment library and the integration with custom code that calls the API. So this is basically using Dialogflow as just a service. It's just detecting your intent. So you take the text or the voice, send it to Dialogflow, it sends back the data, and you go along on your merry way. All right. Now I'm going to show you some stuff. No more slides. You guys happy about that, right? Me too. Yeah, I don't like slides. So the thing that I built to show off Dialogflow is basically it's a pizza store called Pizzazz. Pizzazz. And Pizzazz is it's a startup here in Scott's Addition, not that way somewhere. And they think they can get some hipsters to buy some pizzas. And but they built their online store, and it kind of flopped. So they think, well, maybe if we built a chat interface, people can go in and order pizzas on their phone or talk to their phone or do whatever. Then that'll work. So the CTO's bright idea is to build this Pizzazz bot, and he wants to target Slack and Google Assistant for the initial release. So the features of this Pizzazz bot is to place an order, to when you order a pizza, give it the size, crust, and toppings, order multiple pizzas, be able to enter delivery information, and then once the order's placed, be able to track it, right? So no money, no frills, whatever. This is sort of an MVP or a pilot. So that's what I'm going to show you guys. So let's see if I can do this here. Okay. Hang on a second. Oh, gosh. Have you ever had this problem? Why does it do that? Is that it? Nope. All right. It had my display options on that screen. Let's see if this works. Okay, so let's see. So we're going to start by going to our Dialogflow console here. And so this is Dialogflow by Google. And I'm already logged in, so I'm going to go to the console. So here is, this is our bot. That's pretty good. Can you guys see that okay? All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to demo the integration with Google Assistant. So let's hope this works. Demos during presentations always work. Okay, all right, let's see. Did it connect? Okay, Google. Talk to Pizzazz Helper.
Okay, let's get the test version of Pizzazz Helper. Greetings. How can I assist?
I want to place an order.
What would you like?
A large pan pizza.
And for the toppings?
Sausage, pepperoni, cheese, and green peppers.
A large sausage, pepperoni, cheese, and green pepper pizza with thick crust. You bet.
That's all.
What's your address?
2000 West Broad Street.
What number can I reach you at?
804-555-1212.
Order 1004 will run you $13. Your food will be delivered to 2000 West Broad Street within 20 minutes. We'll call 804-555-1212 if we have questions. See you soon.
Okay, so that is our chat bot. All right, I'm out. That's good. I got an applause. So I'm going to try and show you within the next 20 minutes how to make that work. Okay, so that is basically 5 intents that I have set up here. And so we're gonna go through these intents, but first I'm gonna just give you a quick overview of the panel. I've made it a little bit bigger, so it's in mobile view, but over here on the left is your sort of menu. So you can dig through and see the intents and the entities and the fulfillment and the integrations and various things. You can get to the agent information here. I've got a couple of other agents you can switch around. So that's sort of where your menu is. We're going to start with the entities. So here are your entities. Again, we heard those, crust size and topping, right? So we'll go in, we look at the crust. We'll see that I've defined the crust options that I wanted here, the gluten-free and thin and, regular. These are all the aliases, right, that I've specified. You can also, if you've got a lot, you can switch to raw mode and copy in CSV or JSON and just make it easier. Or you can use the API, again, if you're all DevOpsy and stuff. Who does that these days? Can also, so size, again, size, extra large, large, medium, small, all the different aliases. Nothing too tricky here. They all have what you would expect. Here's the toppings. It's quite a few. Probably not everything that you would want. One trick is that when you list your entity value, you have to repeat it in the alias or it will never be matched. So fortunately, when you enter it using the console, it'll automatically copy it over to the alias, but those are some sort of little gotchas here and there. Okay, so those are the 3 custom entities or developer entities that I've created. So let's go over here and look at the intents. So for the intents, I've got 5 intents. I only demoed 3 of them. So I demoed order start, order add pizza, and order done. Here in a bit, I'll demo order track, and I probably won't even demo order cancel. But those are the 5 intents that we wanted to build to make this work. So let's take a look at the order start intent first. Okay, so we'll start here with the training phrases. So these are the sort of training phrases that this intent will match, right? So place an order, order something, start an order, deliver me a pizza, order pizza. This is just a handful. You could probably come up with like maybe 4 or 5 more. And again, it doesn't have to be exact, but these are the sort of basic framework of the training phrases. This one doesn't have any parameters, so there's nothing super fancy about it. I will say that here's our first sort of taste of contexts. So as soon as the order start intent is triggered and responded, it will create this order context, and that order context will be active, and then it'll be used later on. You'll see it when you set up the input context for the order, placing an order for a pizza, and also for order done. We created a couple of responses. So these are the text responses, like what would you like, what can I get for you? You heard it say them, right? You can also define platform-specific ones. So for Google Assistant, we wanted to get some suggestions. So you can suggest to order a small, medium, large, or extra large pizza. Unfortunately, there's no way to click multiple suggestions. So you really kind of just sort of have a finite set of suggestions to offer. And the same with Slack. You can go in and just define some quick replies, which work just like suggestions. So the fulfillment. Notice that I didn't enable fulfillment for this intent because there's no custom logic for it. So each intent you can enable or disable fulfillment on an intent by intent basis to sort of limit the amount of code that you have to write. Okay. So next, sure. So the add pizza one is sort of one of the bigger ones. So let's take a look at that. First, the context. So what we're saying here is for this intent to fire, an order context must be active. It's called an input context. So that means we can have an intent that has the exact same training phrases, but does different things depending on which context is active. So it's sort of a matching thing. And then once it exits, it sort of resets the order context so that additional intents can fire. So here's the training phrases. We'll go to the parameters first, right? So you've seen this. I've already defined it. You go in and you define your parameter names. You select your entities, and then you define prompts. I happen to not define any prompts here, and I'll show you why in a second. And then we define our responses. Notice it has some emojis here. It supports emojis on pretty much every platform. And it actually responded with an emoji, and what it said was pizza, right, when it was talking. So that was kind of neat. And so here is an example of the annotated intents. So you come in here and you click this, and you can see that it has annotated all of the parameters with the correct, or the values with all the correct parameters. And notice topping is repeated, and that's because topping is a list parameter. So it'll find sausage, pepperoni, and cheese, and it'll clump them all into a nice array for us. Okay, and then that's mostly it for that. Sure.
So, quick questions for clarification. So, with the training phrases, you just give it however many you want, and you annotate those.
Yep.
And then since it's a training phrase, if the user asks something that's similar,
Yep.
but it can still connect the dots and
Yeah.
get the right stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's, again, that's how similar and what similarities is not documented and not well known. So the suggestion obviously is throw some training phrases in and test the hell out of it. And the nice thing is, we'll get to it, well, we might not, probably don't have time. It tracks all the utterances, all the things that have sent to it, and you can retrain your agent like that.
And it'll kind of learn over time.
It won't learn automatically over time. It gives you the ability to, because if it takes a phrase and it says, I don't know what the hell this is, it can't learn it. So you have to tell it. It's almost like labeling your data, right? So I know this about data science and machine learning. In order for a machine learning algorithm to work, you have to have labeled data if it's a supervised sort of machine learning algorithm, which I suspect these are with the trainings of the agents. There's probably other algorithms, the NLP stuff and all the other things that who knows how those work. But yes, it won't learn automatically. It should over time get better at recognizing things just because you're getting the power of the NLP and the extraction logic from everybody else who's running on the platform, right? So, but for your agent and your training, you have to retrain it. I haven't tried it. I like the idea. So knowledge base is the feature that she's talking about is it's a really good way to build what I call a FAQ bot or a frequently asked questions bot. So if you work in customer service, or you work at a company that does customer service, or you work for a platform team at Capital One and they get asked tons of questions all the time, they build these bots that run in their Slack rooms that try and answer these questions for them automatically, right? So Dialogflow has this thing called knowledge base where you can sort of feed it a spreadsheet of questions and answers, and it'll learn how to answer questions for you. I haven't tried it. Sounds cool, though.
I tried it. It was really neat. You have to learn the logic of how it's reading the document.
Yeah.
But once you get that, it's really cool because you can feed it an entire policy.
Yep.
And it'll extract intents from it naturally.
Yeah.
It just takes it out. So
Yeah.
instead of putting all these intents, you just feed it the document.
Yeah. And that works great for knowledge-based sort of agents, right? We've got a service agent almost. So, but yeah, they also have pre-built agents. So you can go through and look at all this library of all these pre-built agents that you can use as a starting point. I didn't on this one. I probably could have. There were some in there that looked pretty similar. And then they have another feature here, just since we're talking about other things, called small talk. So if you, for example, we'll use our test console here, right? So I didn't show you this. So we could say like something like, how old are you, right? Right? Age is just a number. You're only as old as you feel, right? So this is all based on the small talk. I went and I flipped a little checkbox over, and now it knows how to make small talk with people. It's totally frivolous and superfluous, but it makes your chatbot feel like a real person, even though people know it's a fake bot. But if you start asking, like, how old are you, and say, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about, you're like, okay, great. Yeah. I have no idea. I haven't even tried this. Oh, okay. So he didn't know. Anyway, whatever. So my agent's not that smart. Okay. So how are we doing? Okay. Order done. So I'll show you the order done, and we'll stop there, and I'll show you the code. So order done is the intent that you do to say, basically tell them I don't want any more pizzas. Just send me my food, right? And so this is an interesting one where, when I was designing the agent, I didn't want it to be like a wizard. I want it to be somewhat open-ended a little bit. You think about when you call like Marco's or Domino's. You say, hey, hey, how you doing? What can I do for you? I say, I'd like to place an order. Okay, cool. You're like, what would you like? You say, I want this pizza. I want that pizza. And then they'll say, anything else? And you say, no, that's all. And then they'll start asking you questions, right? Like, what's your address? What's your phone number? What's this? This bot behaves the same way because the order done intent has required parameters that I don't train it to extract. So essentially, it listens for I'm done, or that's all, or that's it, or I'm finished. And as long as an order context is active, it will prompt for the address, like the delivery address, and it'll prompt for your phone number. And that's perfectly acceptable, right? I've given it required parameters, and then I just didn't tell it how to extract it. And so you heard it when I said that's all. It started asking me questions, and I had to give answers that would keep prompting me for them. And then it writes out all the responses. This is a case where the last two I've turned fulfillment on, and so the output of the fulfillment is going to call our fulfillment logic in our webhook, and I've also turned on something called slot filling, which essentially takes over prompting. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted to control the prompt messages and use some rich UI elements. You'll see when I demo the Slack bot that it sort of presents these buttons that you can do. And you can't get that if you just let Dialogflow prompt for you. All right, so let's stop there, and I'll show you the fulfillment logic. So here is that gnarly inline editor that nobody in their right mind will want to write code in. So I'm not even going to try. I'll show you this. How's that? Is that good for everybody's eyes? Okay, cool. So this is the Node.js Dialogflow fulfillment library. Hey, JavaScript, everybody! Yay, clap. All right. Okay. So basically, you come in here and you define it. It's just Node, right? So we pull in the Firebase functions because we're using the built-in fulfillment library. uses this magic function name, which is great, to sort of export a function that's used to control the fulfillment logic. Also importing the webhook client from the Dialogflow fulfillment library, as well as some sort of rich UI classes. So what you do is you take the request and response that are coming from the webhook request call. You construct this webhook client, which is just straight out of the Dialogflow fulfillment library, and you assign it to the agent, and then you interact with the method parameters on the agent, the method references on the agent to control the logic. So in this case, really all you do is I've created 4 functions here that map directly to the intents. So you essentially, you create this map at the bottom where you create a map and you set the name of the intent, right? Order add pizza, order done, order cancel, order track, and then you give it the function to call when that intent is matched. Pretty simple, okay? So for order add pizza, if we dig into that, there's a couple things we do here. So because we've turned on slot filling, we want to check to make sure that all of the parameters have been provided, and if they haven't, we want to respond with a prompt to provide it. So in the first case, we're looking for size. They didn't give me a size, so I'm going to say, what size would you like? And here's where I'm using the suggestion so that I can render the actual sizes as links or buttons in whatever platform-specific rich UI element that we add. So I wanted to actually take control over the slot filling so that I could render something a little bit nicer. Same for crust. For toppings, I didn't because, again, you can't select more than one suggestion. And so, but also, because I've turned on slot filling, I have to send a response back, so that's how that works. Once they've answered all the questions, so if the intent will keep triggering until they've answered all of the questions, right? Until they've given all the questions or they've said cancel, I think. So once they give me the size, crust, and topping, I just create a pizza, and I grab the order context, remember, because order context is active for order add pizza, and I just add this pizzas array to the parameters on the context and add the pizza to the array. So again, think of a context like a session, right? So you guys have done session-based programming before. It's usually considered a bad thing, but in this case, it's a good thing, right? So it's going to, Dialogflow will remember this pizza's information. I don't have to store it in a temporary table. My code can be completely stateless. It doesn't have to manage that state at all. I just tell Dialogflow, hey, remember these pizzas in this order context, and it saves it up in the cloud, wherever, cloud, you know. And then that's it. I don't even respond, right? What I do is I let the static responses that I defined in the console respond for me. So you don't have to always respond. As long as you have static responses and you don't respond to anything, it'll respond for you. Okay. And order done. So order done's a little bit more complicated, mainly because we're actually saving the order. So in this case, we grab the order context. I construct an order object based on the pizzas and the phone and the address information that's provided. Again, I didn't turn on slot filling for this particular intent, so I know that whenever this intent is called, I always have my phone and my address because Dialogflow will guarantee it. And then I call my API, and I pass in the data. I get back a response. I do a little formatting of the totals. And then I add this really gnarly response here. Order, you heard it was talking, order 1004, blah, blah, blah. So I'm basically responding with all the key information. But I want to respond with a platform-specific one for Slack, because Slack has some great, rich UI capabilities. So I'm going to construct this nice, pretty Slack response and just add that to the responses as well. Dialogflow is smart enough to know that the Slack integration was making the request, and so it'll only send that Slack payload to Slack. I'm not going to show you this. It's basically just a big blob of JSON. We're getting a little late. So then I clear the order context. The order's been placed. I don't want any more pizzas added to the order. And I set a new context called current order, and the current order context is used for order tracking. So I'm not going to show you that. It's more of the same, but I will try and track my order. So let's come in here and track the order.
Does anybody have an issue with Jay taking as long as he wants?
Okay, Google.
Okay, Jay, take as long as you want.
Okay. Talk to Pizzazz Helper. I'll tell you why in a second. Talk to Pizzazz Helper.
What do you mean?
He didn't understand. Talk to Pizzazz Helper. There we go.
All right, let's get the test version of Pizzazz Helper.
Hello, how can I help you?
I want to track my order.
What is your order number?
1004. It's thinking.
Your order is out for delivery.
Should be here soon. You guys hungry? Okay. All right. So that's that. We'll do one more demo here. I want to demo the Slack since I did all that work trying to get the pretty UI. So, okay, I know what I haven't done. I want to show you the integrations. So if you come here and you go to integrations, you'll see that I've turned on Slack and this web demo thing, and also Google Assistant's turned on. So let's go to Google Assistant first. So if we come here and click this, really all you do is you click. I just clicked it, and then you go to test. And you wait a second. It's coming. So behind the scenes, it goes and creates a Google project for you and a Google Assistant and all that stuff. So just so you can test. So I'm going to go ahead and test. I'll say, talk to my test app. And then notice down here, you'll see the suggestions, right? I wish I could show you on my phone, but my cord's not working. So here's like place an order, right? Hang on. There should be a way to do this. Anyway, so what can I get for you, right? So here's those things here. So you can test all you want. It's really easy. You just click through, and it creates, as long as you have a Google account, which you have to have Dialogflow working anyway, you can quickly do a test. You can also do a test here on this web demo, which is kind of nice. It's very simple. You can, it just basically renders up a quick, hi, no, what's your name? I didn't get that. So essentially, you've got a way to test it outside of the console here without doing any work. And then I want to show you the Slack is the last little bit I want to show you. So I've got the test bot running. So I should be able to go to my my Slack and go to apps. And there's Dialogflow bot. So now I've got the Dialogflow bot. Let's see if it works. So let's place. I want a pizza. Let's see what it does. Didn't like it. Place an order. Okay, so there's the suggestions, right? So I can say I want a medium pizza. What kind of crust? I want regular. And then I'll say cheese and sausage. I kind of like cheese and sausage. Yeah. So let's add another pizza. What do you guys like? What do you want? Anchovies? Extra large pan pizza with fish. Let's see if it. No, I didn't do with anchovies. Kind of crust. Okay, it didn't get it pan. So that's a problem. I'll probably need to retrain the agent because it should have got pan there, but it didn't recognize it. So I'll just say thick. Oh, I didn't get anchovies either. Bummer. Okay. It's awful. Throw it out. All right, so I'm done. What's your address? 1234 Main Street. Doesn't do anything. It recognizes the address, but it doesn't geocode or anything, so you'd want to add all that stuff too. 804-555-1212. Let's see if it comes back with a nice pretty UI. It did. Okay, cool. So here is an example of the sort of formatted text. This is a custom view that's only going to go to Slack. None of the other platforms get it. I think that is it. So anybody have any questions about that craziness? Beg your pardon?
Is that template through handlebars, or did you just code that in directly?
This is this is Slack's blocks API, and so if you were to go and build a Slack bot, it gives you the ability to just construct this JSON object, and it'll render it.
Can you pass along the rest of an utterance? For example, is there a way to catch if somebody says, I want that to be vegan, and the bot has no idea what's going on but wants to send it along?
You'd have to create an intent
Yeah.
to capture that. It won't. I mean, what it'll do is it sends you what the user said, but then you're on your own.
Yeah.
So, but if what I would suggest probably is you capture something like vegan, the concept of vegan, and what you could also do is probably add logic to the fallback intent to sort of send that along, maybe to send an email or connect someone to a human person to do it. But yeah, it won't. Like I said, it'll send the whole utterance, but it won't. If it doesn't map to an intent, you have to handle it through like the fallback intent.
Do you have the, like listing the options, do you have to add your own functionality for that? So like if it says, what size,
Mhm.
I say, what are my options? Do I have to add that in, or does it?
Yeah, it wouldn't work when it's prompting.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, it would. I don't know how it would do that. I'd have to check, but I think at that point you're in what's called prompt mode, and so you probably would, if you needed something like that, you'd have to roll your own to handle that. You couldn't use prompts for it because when you're in prompt mode, it's actually expecting not a question but an answer.
What kind of reporting do you have on hit and miss? How effective your
How effective is it?
yeah.
It's really as good as the training data that you've given it. So
It doesn't track the hit rate and miss rate.
it does, yeah. So so if you come in here to the console, they have a lot of analytics. So you have you can come in and see analytics. You can see what the exit rate was, what the session flow was. And then you can also come and look at the history to see which intents were fired. And then if you go to training, you can see which were missed. It's not showing anything right now, but you can essentially look at every single utterance, and it'll tell you whether it matched or not. And so you can come in here and see all the data that you need to decide how you want to train your agent. Yes?
What does Google do with your data? They store
It
it for
stores it, they take it, they send it to NSA, they use it to sell marketing materials to you, they're probably sending spam. You should expect Google to use all your data. Actually, I'm being a little facetious. There is a way to opt in and out of certain things, but I think for the most part, you can expect them to use most of your data. So let's, sorry, I was being flip. It's a commercial service. So I'm using the standard plan, which is free, but it's throttled. So if you try and use it for much more than what I'm doing, you'll get throttled. It's extremely reasonably priced. Hang on, let me answer his question real quick. So yeah, I think there is somewhere. You'll have to read the fine print to see whether you feel comfortable with using it or not, because I can't tell you for sure. I do know that Capital One is like this close to saying yes, and Capital One doesn't say yes to things unless they're sure that it's going to work. So you asked the question.
So yeah, I was just kind of commenting that, with, it being free or low cost.
Oh yes, it's a.
Google has to make money somewhere.
Oh yes, they make money. So the essentially it's usage based, right? So the standard edition is free for all time, but there's usage quotas and things like that. The enterprise edition, as you can see, it's 0.002 cents per text per message. So unless you're, I don't know, like sending Chinese spam, like I'm getting on my phone, who's getting those Chinese calls like in Mandarin? Okay. Only me, okay, where am I going? Google sold my data, yeah, that's exactly right. So, so yeah, it's extremely reasonable from my perspective. If you're a high volume, you're going to want to start counting those pennies. But for what it's doing, if you want this functionality, I don't think you can get it with writing it yourself. I mean, how much do data scientists cost these days? $200,000-$300,000 a year? What? I don't know. And they're like 18, just out of college. What's the deal with that?
And then you need to throw in an
Foosball.
API or two.
Foosball and who's ask probably some more questions. Yes. Yeah, they will, especially in that context where you're. But they are related. They are, but you're in prompting mode at that point. It's expecting an answer, like it's trying to fill a missing parameter. If you were just talking to it, and it would send all that information and try and match it to an intent, but you were unintelligible, right? So, the human brain. We are so capable of understanding nonsense and sort of figuring out what you meant. These things, especially Dialogflow, won't be able to do it. You probably would want to get a really smart data scientist to help you out with that.
So I'll have to wait for her to receive that information, then basically wait for her to ask me additional questions. And when I get to the point where she says, "Are you done?" I can probably ask that question as long as it's coded.
Yeah. What you can do is you can say cancel, stop, right? So, and she'll sort of say okay, and she'll stop, and then you can sort of reframe your question. But yeah, we've all been in that sort of interaction with Alexa where you're like, no, that's not what I meant. What please stop talking, and yeah, so you could probably do some fancy things to make that, but it's just not that sophisticated yet, unfortunately. No, where you're sort of starting with one thing and then you're switching gears in sort of mid-sentence. Yeah, no. Unless it's able to figure out that it matched the intent based on the second thing you were saying, then it would accidentally work. You could potentially give it training phrases maybe, but I think that would be pretty tricky. You might be able to make it work, but I wouldn't count on it. Hi.
Just do fallback intent that confirm the information, and then encouraging a tool, are you sure you want these toppings? No. Okay, what toppings do you want?
Well, they do have this concept of a follow-up intent that I didn't model, and that follow-up intent is sort of like the "Are you sure's," right? And so where you're confirming things, it gets very wordy, and so you have to make your own decision about how you want your chatbot to work. And it depends on what you're doing. Like if you're placing an order for something, you might want to confirm it, right? Like I didn't do it here. But if you're just answering a question, it's like, are you sure this is a question? Like, just answer it,
Well, in the case of follow-up intent, a good one would be once you give all the toppings you want, and there are more than, let's say, 3 or 4 of them, it would ask you which one out of those you want to be more on your pizza than the rest, something like that. Some people like more sausage or onions than anything else.
Yeah, and you might be able to do that. Like you could say, okay, got your toppings. Is there any? Do you want to change them? Yeah, you could sort of ask them, or you could just stop, and then you could build intents to say, oh wait, I changed my mind. I really want double cheese, right? And so you could capture that. There's a topping called double cheese, right? And it'll so it's again, it's how your agent wants to work. But if you want it to sort of detect that you changed your mind in mid-utterance, that might be tricky. All right, so that's it. Hope you guys got something out of that. I would say, like, this is super approachable, you know, and it's not that expensive. If you have a product or a service that you're supporting, like, play around with it. It took me, well, it took me a long time to build that, but mainly because I was trying to get it to work a very particular way. But it's pretty approachable. So thank you.
Just closing down tonight, everybody else comes to passion for questions.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
So hey, as Jay is closing up and